Hello friends, this is Jeff Carter with another COVID-19 case update. In this video, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the case levels and growth rates in the United States overall, and then I'm going to get into quite a bit of depth when talking about each of the individual states, because I believe that that's going to be more important for each individual person to know exactly what's happening in their local geography. So with that, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who may find this interesting. All right, let's get started. Oh, I wanted to also mention, this is going to be a pretty long one, so I will be including a comment, a pinned comment that has timestamps of the basically the chapters in this video. So hopefully it's not a super long video, but I know that it will be kind of long, and if you want to skip ahead, I will provide some timestamps for you. So please be sure to be on the lookout for that. Okay, let's get started. The CDC is reporting that the total number of cases in the United States is 1,152,000, and total deaths right now 67,500 nearly. I'm not going to spend much time at all, in fact, talking about deaths in this video, but I will be talking about cases. And obviously those case numbers are below the actual. I will discuss that a little bit more later on in the video. But for right now, those are the reported case numbers, 1,150,000 roughly. Here's the chart that the CDC used to update. It's actually not being updated anymore as of April 27th, which is probably good because, as you see, this big giant bar makes absolutely no sense. This is supposed to be cumulative cases, and it's not mathematically, doesn't make any mathematical sense for there to be a sharp uptick and a sharp downtick in a cumulative time series. So what the CDC is reporting, continuing to report now, is new daily cases, which honestly I believe is a better time series to depict the progress being achieved in the fight. And so I don't have any problem with that. But when the CDC does change the data it's using, I just tend to be skeptical and careful. So what I did is I went back and made sure that time series matched the cumulative that I had previously, and it was really, really close. So I'm not too worried. I just think that the CDC is switching to a data series that is more relevant for tracking the stage that we are in. So here's the cumulative cases based on all of the new cases that the CDC is reporting. As you can see, it's difficult to really make heads or tails of this. You just see increasing every single day. Basically, you need to look at the derivative of this in order to make any sense. But the idea of this is that this will continue to gradually go up until the case rate slows and eventually plateaus, so that we reach our maximum number of cumulative cases. And that plateau would be signified by 0% growth. So you see that it starts out with a really high growth rate and it trends down towards zero. It's pretty much leveled off since about 419 right now. And 419 is whenever I presented this data last. Right now it's about 2.7% daily, which it sounds low, but when you're talking daily growth rates, that still means that cumulative cases will double over about 26 days. So we really need to get that number all the way down to zero. All right. So the data that I just presented to you is cumulative cases, which is this blue line right here. And you see that I will talk more about this here in a minute, but you see that needs to plateau. A way to get a better sense of where we are at in this is to look at the orange, which is the derivative of cumulative cases or just new cases. So this will tell us, give us a better sense of where we're at along this blue growth curve. So again, going back to the new cases reported by the CDC, you see that It has been pretty level here for some time now. Let's go ahead and look at the actual growth rates. Okay, so obviously huge amount of volatility early on. I presented this data to you last at 419. It's basically been trending along basically 0% growth for a while, but let's look at the 7-day average growth rate just to get a better sense without the volatility. So as you can see, there was a nice downtrend in the growth rate, and it actually got into the negative a little bit, which is certainly a great thing. But then it came back up, and it's basically been sitting along the 0%. Now, we need to get that growth rate in new cases down into negative territory. As long as it's trending along 0%, that means that cumulative cases are still growing. We certainly need new cases to trend down. Okay, so that's what we need to see right there. Okay, I'm going to spend a little time talking about the level of the cases and the case growth rates. So going back to this chart here, this is basically the hypothetical, like a scenario in which no social policies are initiated to mitigate the spread of the disease. Essentially what happens is cumulative cases will increase at an increasing rate until 50% of the population, roughly 50%, is infected, and then it will increase at a decreasing rate until eventually it plateaus and it limits towards 100% of the population. Okay, so with new cases, so right here we have this orange is the new cases. With the new cases plateauing, I can almost guarantee you that, so right now we have the CDC reporting 1 million, a little over 1,100,000 reported cases. Well, there's some studies out there, like a pretty famous one right now is one out of Stanford that says that based on antibody testing, that they believe that somewhere between like 55 and 85 times the number of reported cases are actually infected. Well, so if we take 85 times the 1.1 million, that gets us to about 98 million. Okay, so 98 million is not 50% of the population, and I'm confident that it wouldn't be 50% of the population. Whatever the number is, I'm sure it's below 50% of the population, because it would be almost a mathematical impossibility for new cases to level out if we were actually past 50% infected. It would have to dip into the negative territory. So when you see these studies that say that the cases are being dramatically underestimated, just keep in mind that even the most extremely high estimates of the infection rate are still going to be below 50% of the population. So if mitigation policies are opened up completely, we will be going back into cumulative cases increasing at an increasing rate until we hit 50% of the population infected. So I'm not necessarily for a complete lockdown. And, I think that we actually need to be intelligently getting some people back, but we need to make sure that we, like I said, do this intelligently, where we incorporate testing, and we want to make sure that those antibody tests are accurate. They're not giving too many false positives and giving people confidence that they can return to their normal life because they're quote unquote immune when maybe they perhaps aren't. So I'm definitely for a measured response, getting people back to their normal lives, but we are definitely below 50% infected, so we need to be very careful about how we do that. Okay, moving on. Let's take a look and let's see how states are doing individually. Okay, so in this next section, I'm going to be looking at each state's cases relative to New York's cases, because New York is the worst infected state in the nation, and so it just helps to know, how each state is doing relative to New York. Okay, so the maximum red in this map is going to be New York on that given date. So we're going to see how each state is doing relative to New York. Okay, so March 30th, New York was really bad. March 30th, New York was already reaching and overwhelming its hospital infrastructure. So you see here that on March 30th, no state except for New Jersey really was even close to New York. When I last presented this data to you, it was on April 8th, and we see that most states hadn't, most states hadn't gotten anywhere close to New York, except Louisiana and perhaps Michigan were starting to show some signs of getting getting close to New York, or catching up to New York. The latest data I have, just because it's taken me some time to collect it, is May the 1st. So on May the 1st, you see that more states have started to catch up. So the growth rates are basically accelerating relative to New York in the other states. So I'll go back through those three. There's March 30th, there's April 8th, and there's May the 1st. Okay, now something I don't like about the way this is being presented, the way that I'm presenting this, is basically in this situation, New York is a moving goalpost. So you can see here that right here at the legend here, New York on March 30th was 3,427 confirmed cases per million population, up to 7,766 on April 8th. And then on May the 1st, up to 15,849 confirmed cases per million population. And let me take a second just to point out that 15,849 per million is equal to 1.58%. So that's the confirmed number of cases. So if we take like the Stanford study, for instance, and we apply the maximum multiple to New York, it doesn't even make sense, because you're going to take 1.58 times 85 and get 134%. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So pretty confident that the 85 multiple is way too high. Now, I think that it's possible the multiple could be as high as 25. So, on a nationwide basis, I think we could be up to around 25% infected, but it's really high up in the air. Again, I just wanted to point that out to indicate that there's still a lot of room, even in New York, to get to 50% infected. Okay, moving on. Because in this time series, New York is a moving goalpost, what I decided to do is to look at the same map, but anchor the max red to New York on March 30th. That way, we can start to see how states, because if we assume that a state's hospital infrastructure is roughly correlated with population, then if we look at states approaching New York's situation on March 30th, then we can start to get a feel for our individual states approaching their own hospital infrastructure. So this is rough approximation, but I think it's kind of illustrative. Okay, so this is March 30th, and this is going to be weekly. Okay, so April 8th, you see that Louisiana reached and actually exceeded New York as compared to New York on March 30th. April 15th, we start to see Michigan reaching that point. April 22nd, Illinois has now reached that, and much of the Northeast as well. And April 1st, we start to see huge swaths of the nation reaching this very terrifying statistic, which is at least 3,427 confirmed cases per million population. So again, It's just a rough idea of our states reaching the point where their hospital infrastructure may be overwhelmed. So, okay, so those were the cumulative cases. But I like also to look at the new confirmed cases, which is basically the growth rate in cumulative cases. And so let's look at that. Okay, on April 8th, which I'm just going to show you a couple of data points here, and then I'm going to actually show you an animation. So April 8th, we see New York and Louisiana and New Jersey were the worst. Then, as of May 1st, New York, New Jersey, the Northeast in general is kind of bad, but we also start to see some areas in the Midwest starting to get bad as well. Nebraska and Illinois are key states to look at there. Rhode Island actually had the worst per capita new case rate over the past 3 days, and also important to see here, New York has slowed. So that's good news for New York. Obviously, bad news for these other states that are accelerating. All right. Speaking of accelerating, are each new state's new case rate slowing or accelerating? So, in this animation, this is going to be each slide will be a new date. So this is going to be daily. It's going to go really fast, so I don't take up too much time. But the max red, basically, I want to point out that whether or not a state if their growth rate is accelerating or decelerating. So the max red for each state will be that state's maximum new cases. So, for instance, if New York's maximum new cases was 450 per million population per day, and today it is at 225, then it would be like kind of a 50% red, if that makes any sense. So, and if a state were to get all the way back down to zero, then they'd be to white. Okay, so with that in mind, I'd like to point out just a couple of states for you to take a look at. Montana is a state to keep an eye on, and also, well, I'll give you three: Montana, Louisiana, and Wisconsin. And you'll see they're not all going to do the same thing, but I'd take a look. And if you need to, go ahead and after you watch it the first time, back it up and look at this again, and you'll start to see what I'm talking about. Okay, so here we go. All right, so we start to see some cases. Washington, was the first state, and then you see that Montana gets bright red. Okay, other states getting bright red, but you see Montana in particular, it didn't stay bright red. In fact, it turned to white. Well, that's what we want every state to do, and every state will do that eventually when the new cases eventually get to zero. Now the question is, how do we do that? Okay, and the answer is you be very intelligent about social distancing. Make sure that those people that have not been tested, we don't know if they have the disease or not, continue to social distance. But we need to ramp up testing so we know whether or not people have the disease. And if you've been determined to have the antibodies, then start relaxing the social distancing requirements on those people. So Montana is a great example. Idaho, Louisiana also. Now Wisconsin, I'll get to a little bit later, but I'll get to it later. So, all right, moving on. So we just showed in that map kind of a time lapse of each state's new case growth trajectory, but it's hard to see all of that. When you get to the end of the animation, you can't remember what that state's color looked like 6 slides ago. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to show each state in a chart, and each chart is going to. So this is each chart. This is each state on one chart, or all of the states on one chart. And the x-axis here is confirmed cases. Okay, so this is not time on the x-axis. This is confirmed cases. And this is a logarithmic scale, so each of these lines here is a doubling. On the y-axis, you're going to have new cases per million population. And again, this is a log scale on the y-chart. And the reason I set up these particular data series for these axes is because new cases, when it's unmitigated growth, are very, very strongly determined by the level of confirmed cases. Essentially, when it's unmitigated growth, the strongest variable to determine what new cases will be is confirmed cases. And you can see that based on this extremely, what appears to be linear, but well, it is linear, but you have this linear growth here, and that's linear based on confirmed cases, not based on time. If it was based on time, you would see it be exponential growth, but when it's a function of confirmed cases, it's linear. So you see this straight line basically up while it's unmitigated, and then you see social mitigation policies, policies to mitigate the spread start to deviate from this basically straight line up. And okay, let me show you what it looks like for one individual state. I'm going to look at New York because it's the worst infected, and it's just the one that I'm picking out. So there are 3 lines on this. Okay, this very light colored line, for each of the states, it'll be exactly this way. So there's going to be a light colored line. That's the daily new case rate. The somewhat less light line, the medium line, is going to be the 3-day moving average. And then the dark line is going to be the 7-day moving average. And I'm making that the dark one because it really removes a ton of the volatility, as you can see here. I also want to point out, this might be confusing just right off the bat, but when there's huge, very, very rapid exponential growth, you can expect the shorter term time series is going to be high, and then the longer moving averages are going to be lower, because this is incorporating more of the older and lower data points. So that's why you see this separation here, and it continues basically until exponential growth starts to be mitigated, and then it begins to converge a little bit. Okay. One last thing, these dots that are colored differently, this is the data, for those of you who've been following me, this is the data that I presented to you the last time that I showed you the state by state, and then this new dot is where it was as of May the 1st. And the dot furthest to the right is not necessarily, well, the data furthest to the right is necessarily the last point, but it's not necessarily the point to the very bottom, because it can possibly go down and then come right back up again, depending on states' policies. So, okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and press play on, I'm going to show each state, but I'm going to show it extremely rapidly. I'm not going to provide any commentary. If you need to, please slow the video down, and you can pause it, and so that you can see your own individual state. But I'm not going to take up too much time, and then I'm going to talk about some states individually. Okay, so here we go. Okay, I'm not sure why it went backwards on me. Here we go. Okay, so again, if you need to, go back and just slow down the video or pause it if you need to look at your own individual state. But Now I'm going to take just a couple of minutes, maybe, I don't know how many minutes, but I'm going to look at the top 10 and the bottom 10. So the best states and the worst states, okay? And so here I'm going to start with the 10th best state and count down to the best, all right? All right, so Louisiana. Louisiana was doing very poorly about the last time, and the reason it was doing poorly was because Mardi Gras essentially made it a hot spot. But they've done a very good job of mitigating the spread as of the last time I reported this to you, so they're good. Idaho has been a good example. New York actually has been a pretty good example. This may look like the slope. So the slope here looks way more intense than the slope here, but because this is exponential, these axes are logarithmic. The numbers on New York are much higher, which is why it looks like the slope is less, but it's actually quite a bit intense, the reduction there in New York. Maine, this was just mathematical, so here you're seeing a decrease from like this level. So the slope, even though we see this up here, it's actually coming down from here. So it's just showing we don't know exactly what's going on, what it's gonna do from this point, but it's down right now. Florida is doing okay. That's after they decided to finally shut down their beaches, etc. South Dakota, last time I presented this to you, this state was doing very poorly, but they have since instigated policies that have reduced the spread of the disease. And Vermont, one important note here, while it has a significant decrease, there has been an uptick. So just because you're going down does not mean you continue to go down to zero. It's important to continue the policies that led to that downward turn. Alaska, and that might be the best one. Can't remember. Oh yeah, Hawaii. Oh no, there's one better than this one. And Montana. Okay, so I bring up Montana again because you'll recall that they're basically at zero now. We go back to that map and it was white in a sea of red. So Montana, whatever Montana's doing, is certainly a lead that other states should follow. Okay, let's now go to 10 of the worst states. Now, before I actually go to the states, I want to talk about again, just because a state goes down initially does not mean that the growth rate cannot start to trend upwards again if mitigation policies are removed. So just keep that in mind. All right, we have Illinois. You can see the difference in this chart versus those that I showed you on the good side. Virginia, New Mexico, all these states are just trending. Wisconsin is one that I wanted to call your attention to specifically because you'll recall, those of you who keep a close eye on the news, Wisconsin held a primary, and basically there was a movement that was trying to get mail-in voting approved for Wisconsin to prevent, people from having to show up in public, and it looks that while Wisconsin was initially making some progress around the time of that election, the case rate did trend upwards again. So that's really unfortunate. But Wisconsin, I kept an eagle eye on Wisconsin because I thought surely if there was going to be a sign that the theory is proving out, it would be Wisconsin, and unfortunately that appears to have played out. We have Tennessee, who is making progress, and then apparently I don't know the policies in Tennessee, but it appears that they have relaxed restrictions, and you have a growth rate trending back upwards. We have North Dakota. We have Kansas, Iowa, and one thing to note about Iowa and finally Nebraska. Nebraska is the worst right now. Iowa and Nebraska are both suffering due to meat processing plants that have been the latest coronavirus hotspots. So you're seeing in these charts the issue with those particular hotspots. Very, very just I can't even think of a good word for these charts, but certainly I guess depressing is the word that I would use to describe these charts. So definitely want to, states definitely want to be following the lead of the states in the top 10 best growth trajectories, and we want to be avoiding the policies in these final 10. Okay. So with that, the key takeaways I'd ask that you take away are, just because your growth rate is trending down does not mean that it's manifest destiny to trend down forever. If you lift social restrictions too early, the growth rates will trend back upwards, and that's especially right now when we are pretty confident that less than 50% of the population is infected. So everyone who has the ability to, please maintain social distancing, continue your thorough hand washing, and do everything that you can in your power to mitigate the spread of this disease. So thank you everyone for watching. Please like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to be notified. Please also share this video with anyone else who may find this content interesting and or informative. Thank you again, and stay safe out there, and I will talk to you next time. Thanks. Bye.